I'm Reece, and I'm here to tell you that you're listening to the Decarbonisation Dialogue, a podcast from Salix.
Welcome to Delivering on Climate Change, our collective challenge. Welcome to the Decarbonisation Dialogue. I am Hannah Walker, and I believe that the best way to communicate a message is by being passionate about what you are talking about. Through that passion, I believe you take people with you and create action using your influence to make change and make a difference. Our task today is to get all of us to net zero. My guest today is Professor Emily Shuckburgh, who is Director of Cambridge Zero, the University of Cambridge's major climate change initiative. She's also a Professor of Environmental Data Science at the Department of Computer Science and Technology and a Fellow of the Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership. She is a mathematician and climate scientist and a Fellow of Darwin College, a Fellow of the Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership, a Fellow of the British Antarctic Survey, a Fellow of the Royal Meteorological Society, and an Honorary Fellow of the Energy Institute. At the University of Cambridge, she is Academic Director of the Institute of Computing for Climate Science and Co-Director of the Centre for Landscape of Regeneration. Emily worked for more than a decade at the British Antarctic Survey, where her work, including leading a UK national research programme on the Southern Ocean and its role in climate. She has also acted as an advisor on climate to the UK government in various capacities, including as a friend of COP26. She was awarded an OBE in 2016 and a CBE in 2025. She is co-author with King Charles and Tony Juniper of the Ladybird Book on climate change. Among her other responsibilities, she is Honorary President of the Aldersgate Group and Trustee of the UK Centre for Ecology and Hydrology. It's an amazing CV, and I'm really going to get round to, I'm really curious, do you really keep a small bottle of water from the bottom of the Antarctic Ocean by your desk?
I do. And partly because, to go to the start of your introduction, I'm genuinely passionate about, particularly about the Antarctic, having spent such a long time studying it. There's something particularly special about having a sample of water that I personally had taken from the deep, deep depths of the Southern Ocean.
Just incredible. Well, I want to go back. Exactly. I want to focus on your career and where this passion has come from, because you've got a highly successful career. I've just read out this incredible CV. You've studied the Antarctic. You've collaborated with King Charles. You've got an OBE, MBE. You're an expert on climate change. You're a climate scientist. How did it all start, and what inspires you?
You said in the CV, in a sense, how it all started. So I started it as a mathematician, but I had always been fascinated and inspired by the natural world. And so when I came to the end of my initial mathematical studies, I really wanted to be able to use those mathematical skills to better understand the world around us. And that's really where I entered into this, was to understand how the atmosphere and the oceans work from a physics perspective. And the more that I studied, so I started studying that in the early 1990s, and the more that I studied, the more I started to see the signals of our changing climate. And at the same time, the political concern associated with that was starting slowly to rise. And so it was through that I started to become increasingly passionate about the fact that I had this knowledge and insight into this global challenge. And I felt that it was incredibly important that I did two things: that I dedicated my research to understanding and documenting that change, but also that at the same time that I did what I could to warn society of those changes. Mm-hmm. And so that's where my work was focused for a long time. And then in the last 5 years or so, I've started to spend more time focused around looking at potential solutions, because I felt there was only so much I could do in terms of describing the scale of the problem. And at some point, I had a responsibility and a duty to also be working towards supporting the solutions. And that's what my role as director of Cambridge Zero has been primarily focused on.
And I do want to talk about those solutions but first of all, I want to talk about the Antarctic for a moment. But you have said, when you're talking about climate change, it's not an impossible task, but I know that you feel it's shifting that kind of, you've called it the juggernaut of the global economy, going from fossil fuels to creating a cleaner future for us all. We are facing massive challenges on climate change. And one of your roles is as fellow of the Antarctic Society. The Society leads on polar science and polar operations, addressing key climate issues. What are the practical things? You've been there, you've worked there. What are the things that you see happening, and what can bodies like the Society do to help us?
Well, the first thing is that the polar regions, both the Arctic and the Antarctic, have been changing rapidly. I mean, I think now we're starting to see and feel in our everyday lives the effects of climate change, the extreme heat that we've been seeing in the UK over recent weeks, for example. But it's undoubtedly true that those changes were more obvious in the polar regions sooner than they probably were in many other parts of the world. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that, as you just alluded to, the polar regions can tell us how the current climate change sets itself in a much longer history of climatic changes that have affected the Earth. And we know that we've been in ice ages in the past where we've had very different climates to the one today. And so there's a very sensible question to ask, well, how unusual is the current climate change? And is it just part of a natural cycle where we've seen changes in the past? And what we can do by looking at the drilling down into the ice in the polar regions, particularly in Antarctica, is we essentially are able to find a history of what the climate was like going back more than 1 million years now into the past, because trapped in that ice is actual samples of the actual air that existed in the atmosphere all that time in the past. So it's like a museum of the past climate. And we're able to recover that and have a direct measure of what the climate was like in the past. And through that, we've been able to show without any doubt that the current climate change is completely different to the natural cycles. But the current change is very clearly this extremely rapid change that has been caused by our emissions of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases, primarily through our use of fossil fuels and our impact in terms of deforestation and land use changes.
Mm-hmm. So that really is as you say, you called it kind of drilling down, but it's a layering of what our planet, our wonderful planet, has been like over the many, many centuries, as you say, over millions of years. And you take that and you say, what's it like doing that work when you're there for a moment? How does it feel living there and working on that kind of research and pulling something out that's going to tell you something so important that it's probably going to guide our future? What is it like working there?
Well, it's hard work when you're out doing field work. It's hard work, but there's something about the sense of there being a team of people working together really closely, sometimes in quite harsh environment, because there's nothing about Antarctica that is a benign conditions. But everyone does definitely, again, to come back to where you started, everyone shares that passion for really wanting to understand what's happening to the world. And everyone has a really deep interest just from a purely scientific perspective in enhancing that understanding. So it's a really special environment, both in terms of just the beauty and wonder of the place, but a really special environment in terms of the really close collaboration between the teams of people that are working there.
And that close collaboration that you get there, because you all share this passion to explore, research, bring this information to into the world, and so we can share that out. How does that then echo, do you think, possibly, in the kind of collaboration we are going to need moving ahead on climate change regarding the global community?
Well, I can tell you about a current project that I'm involved in, which I'm actually just as excited and passionate about as the work that I did in Antarctica, and that's our Centre for Landscape Regeneration. And that project is based firmly in the UK. What we are doing is we are looking at how we might be able to manage our land in different ways that have a benefit for nature. They support our climate, both in terms of reducing our emissions, but also helping build resilience to climate change, but also take into account the social and economic context in which those landscapes sit, the people that live in and work in those landscapes. And that project, we're actually working specifically in 3 landscapes. We're working in the Fenlands of East Anglia, the Cairngorms in Scotland, and in the Lake District. And in each landscape, we brought together a really exciting and dynamic group of people. So we have the academic researchers and not just the scientists, but we brought in social scientists into that collaboration as well. But we've also collaborated really strongly with the farming community, with the conservation groups, with the water companies that are really a key part of the landscape in the East Anglian Fens, for example, with the landowners that are a really important part of the Cairngorms, with the local community, working very closely with many of the local schools, with parish councils, with other different community organisations. And that has been just as exciting a collaboration. And we've done it in a way where we've been trying to delve in to understand what those different groups of people have in terms of ideas as to how the future might look differently. And it ends up being this really exciting melting pot of ideas. And some of them might not work, and some of them might be exactly the route to which we can be able to achieve those 3 goals of supporting climate, nature, and the people who live and work in those landscapes. And they might be ideas that as scientists we would never have thought about. And so we're trying to bring together that really, in a sense, the same collaborative spirit that we have out in Antarctica, but bring it to landscapes here, bring it to challenges, really, really tough challenges that we have in the UK. And I think there's something about that model that if we could replicate that in each of the different challenges that we have around the net zero agenda, bringing together groups of people to come up with common sense solutions and see whether or not they can actually work, to kind of tap into that human creativity and ingenuity that can come from all sorts of different perspectives, to look at the challenges from a really holistic sense. That's another kind of key component of what we've been doing. Then it turns something from seeming like an impossible task to something that's actually really quite exciting, and everyone gets excited.
It's that coalition of groups and not being afraid to hear the differences of opinion, because you've mentioned landowners. Of course, there are conservationists, and then there are farmers. And of course, somewhere above, there's Westminster, and there are huge differences, aren't there, of opinion in those groups. Within those groups.
There are, and one of the, and this is where it's been so important to bring our social scientists into the academic side of this project as well. And one of our social scientists who really works on helping to facilitate those sort of conversations between different groups. And she always describes the goal of what she's trying to do in that facilitation is to create an environment where people can disagree well.
Yes, indeed.
And so, people won't necessarily, and there's something about creating a really trusted environment amongst those groups where we genuinely listen to everybody. And once we've built up that trusted relationship, and we will try different ideas, and people know, I think, amongst the groups that we work with, that we may, having listened to their ideas, tested them out scientifically, we may go back to them and say, this was a great idea, but actually it doesn't manage to achieve what we were hoping it was going to.
Yes.
And that's not the end of the road. We'll then say, well, let's see whether we can find a different way that might work instead.
Yes.
And it's part of that kind of creative process of collaboratively developing solutions. And the key thing around that is that they are, what we're trying to achieve is solutions that are fair, that are sustainable in all senses of the word, sustainable and effective.
You do talk about, I've read quite a few interviews, you do talk about trust and fairness. That seems to be a theme going through most of what you're about in terms of your conversations. Let's just talk about the work at Cambridge, because you just mentioned schools, and I think that you've been working, I think, with a primary school at Cambridge, which sounds fascinating. But generally, we're all agreed that we all want a better future. It's just how we get there. Do you think we're willing to change and switch? Because we have unsustainable lifestyles. We're over-consuming. We're flying all over the place. We're still heavily reliant on fossil fuel. And I know that you've said the fossil fuel era is over. What's the next trigger for the climate? What next? What will it take for us to really speed things up? Because you have said yourself that we don't have a minute to waste in getting on with it.
No, we don't. There's lots of things in your question.
I know.
So let me start off with what it takes, and then maybe I'll go back to the primary school, because I think I would like to talk about that and what we've been doing there a little bit. What does it take? We want to live interesting, fulfilling lives. That's a phrase that that very much was part of the work that I was doing with King Charles. He has for a long time been arguing for having a sense of living in harmony with the planet that sustains us as being critical to our futures. And I think there's something really in that. I think that's very important. So that means that if we're looking at solutions for the future, it's about understanding how we can still manage to do all the things that we like doing, but just do them in a way that isn't destroying. And so what does that mean in practical terms? That means thinking about our mobility and how we are able to travel in ways that aren't destructive. It means thinking about our diets and how we're able to feed ourselves in a way that is still finding delicious food to eat, but just finding that food in a way that and producing that food in a way that isn't damaging the planet, and et cetera, through different parts of our lives. So that feels as though that's what the overarching ambition is. In terms of the work that we've been doing with the University of Cambridge Primary School, this was a project that I started, and I've done a lot of work with the former head teacher of that school, James Biddulph. And we actually have a book that's going to be coming out later this year called Education Visions. And the sense of that book was, the real motivator of that book was that children today who are starting their school education, many of them are likely to be living into the next century. So we really need to be thinking of our school education system and designing it in terms of structuring an education that supports those children to live through and then to lead in the context of the challenges of the coming decades. And that really is not just about the content of their education from the disciplinary perspectives, but it's also about enabling them to have the skills that they need to navigate those challenges. And one of the most important of those skills is the skills to be active citizens of the world in that context. And so that was part of the work that we've been undertaking over the last few years.
And that's Education Visions, and we'll be looking out for that. Yeah. Talking about books, you did do that book, the Ladybird Book, with King Charles. What's it like working with the King on a book?
As everyone knows, this is a topic which he's incredibly passionate about. So he was very, very involved in the process of writing that book. And I've already mentioned the Harmony Project, which has been really central to all of his work over many, many decades. And I still remain very much involved in the work associated with that. The more involved I am, and as my own research evolves, I'm increasingly seeing how so much of what we're doing on the research side actually is very consistent with that sense of looking at challenges from a more holistic perspective, bringing together a wide group of different stakeholders, different perspectives. This is something that actually the King has been doing for decades. And I think that sometimes, perhaps in the past, that the importance of that wasn't as widely recognised as maybe it is now today. But I do think that sense of ensuring that people feel that they are involved in creating solutions is so important.
Yes. So do you think you'll be working on another book with the King in the future?
I don't know.
Now, you seem incredibly hopeful. You've been to Antarctica. You understand what's happening with climate change. And as you've said, it's like the juggernaut of the global economy, and we've got to get rid of these fossil fuels. And it's all about various types of innovation, whether it's technology or it's the way we run our lives. You do seem incredibly hopeful in spite of some of the research you have pulled out. You sound like you're an optimist, but what next for you and your career?
Ooh, am I an optimist? I think I'm actually a realist.
Yes.
In the sense, let's not forget the perilous state that the planet is in, either in terms of our changing climate and the real risk of us passing irreversible tipping points in terms of our climate system, or the natural world, and the fact that millions of species are at risk of extinction over the coming decades. So, let's not forget the state of the planet and that it's really heading in the wrong direction. But let's also not be paralysed by the gloom associated with that. Is really where I come from. So understand the scale of the challenge, but don't be paralysed by that. Instead, use that as an even greater incentive to really mobilise and respond and tap into our ability to be able to come together as a global community. And that's what it requires, a global community, to address this global challenge. Come together as a global community to really shape a better future. So there's aspects in which I'm pessimistic, aspects in which I'm optimistic in terms of the solution. And I think in terms of the future, I very much see my own personal role, and I feel quite a deep sense of duty associated with this at this point, really in terms of supporting those two trajectories, continuing to warn of the dangers that we face. And I think it's really important to do so. Many times that I give talks to any group and I describe the state of the planet today, even today, people come up to me and say, I didn't realise. So I think that it's really important to continue to do that. And at the same time, I think it's really important to help shape those solutions. And as you say, some of those solutions are going to be as a consequence of some of the technological innovations that are happening in universities like Cambridge. Some of them are going to be solutions that have been determined in some local context that work in that local context and maybe don't work anywhere else in the world. And it's about all of those being important.
All of those.
And helping to accelerate, because we do need to, given the scale of the challenge, accelerate those solutions.
Okay, super. So that's all of us, because everybody in some way can do something. So it's continuing that conversation, continuing to talk about it. And for you is really using your information to look for those solutions, because we've got a lot of work to do and we are in a climate crisis. There can be no doubt about that. There can be no doubt that climate change is the biggest challenge of our time. Today, we must reduce greenhouse gas emissions to slow global warming. Today, we must act for tomorrow, adjusting our lifestyles to current and future impacts of climate change. Today, we must use our collective wisdom to deliver on our climate commitments. Today, we work for tomorrow's world. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast channels, and if you've got any ideas, please do email us at podcast@salixfinance.co.uk. Thank you very much to Emily for joining us today and talking about your incredible work, and I wish you all the very best for the future. Thank you, Emily.
Thank you.
I'm Sonia, and I'm here to tell you that you've been listening to the Decarbonisation Dialogue, a podcast from Salix. For more information about our work and to find out more content, please visit salixfinance.co.uk/podcasts.